In his diaries, Reagan mentioned Gingrich only once.
If tonight's debate holds to form, Newt Gingrich will invoke the holy name of President Ronald Reagan more times than any of his opponents. The New York Times says Gingrich has used President Reagan's name 55 times. That includes 5 times during Monday's debate alone. The total is a far cry from Rick Santorum's 14 or the mere 6 from the so-called Massachusetts moderate. So how true are Newt's claims of Reagan by association? Joining us now, Democratic former Senator Byron Dorgan of North Dakota, who served in the House throughout the 1980s with the former Speaker. Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, how are you, Martin?
Good to have you. What do you remember of Newt and Reagan back in your House days? Because to hear Newt tell it, the Cold War ended after Reagan and Newt discussed it. And, of course, Mr. Gingrich also brought communism to an end in the Congress, whatever that means.
Yeah, well, you know, Newt Gingrich was a backbencher with a lot of grenades, and he would just throw as many as he could, as often as he could. I knew Ronald Reagan. I'm a Democrat, but I knew Ronald Reagan, and I knew Newt Gingrich, and there's very little similarity that I can see in their style or their approach, and he was a backbencher during those days.
Bob Dole has just come out and said this about Newt Gingrich. He was a one-man band who rarely took advice. Gingrich had a new idea every minute, and most of them were off the wall. Newt would show up at my 96 campaign headquarters with an empty bucket in his hand. That was a symbol of some sort for him, and I never did know what he was doing or why he was doing it, and I'm not certain he knew either. I mean, was Newt carrying the bucket, say, after he'd cleaned the bathrooms or something? What was going on here?
I don't know, but he did talk a mile a minute and have idea after idea. But he was also the one during that early period in the House. He was the person, I think, that began to poison the political waters. You remember he said to Republicans and sent out information all across the country, if you're running for office as a Republican, use these words. I've tested them. You can talk like Newt. Call your opponent or use these words to describe your opponent: sick, lie, pathetic, anti-flag, anti-children, traitor. That's what Newt suggested our politics should be. So, I mean, that was really venal in my judgment. And then fast forward to the time when he was Speaker. I mean, I was around during the White House negotiations. I was one of the Senate negotiators. I was around when Newt Gingrich was bragging about the fact that he was going to close the government down. And he did, of course. And that became a moment that I think he has probably always regretted, and certainly his colleagues that he served with in the House regretted it, because not too long after that, they decided they didn't want him as Speaker any longer.
Indeed. Today, Newt's been touting a 1995 endorsement from President Reagan's wife, Nancy. I'd like to play 2 clips for you. First, how Newt tells it, and then what the former First Lady actually said. Listen.
In 1995, at the Goldwater Institute, Nancy Reagan said that Ronald Reagan's torch had been passed to me as Speaker of the House and that I was carrying out the values he believed in.
Barry Goldwater handed the torch to Ronnie, and in turn, Ronnie turned that torch over to Newt and the Republican members of Congress to keep that dream alive.
Senator, she goes on to compliment they and them, meaning the then new Republican majority, but apparently Newt only heard the words I and me.
Yeah, but that's not unusual. You hear a lot of this sort of thing from Newt. I mean, he expands and exaggerates most things. And I just think, look, this is almost low-grade entertainment to watch what's playing out here. The problem is it's very serious. We're talking about someone to lead this country, someone running for president who aspires to lead America. And you expect from that sort of a person, you expect good ideas, you expect leadership capability. You don't expect someone who has been fined $300,000 for ethical violations when leading the House of Representatives. You don't expect someone, in my judgment, with Newt Gingrich's record. But, look, I'm not being consulted by the Republicans about who they should make their standard bearer. They're going to make their own judgment about that. But I'm pretty surprised, frankly, that Newt at this point is where he is in this race.
I think many Republicans feel the same as yourself. Senator Byron Dorgan, as ever, thanks so much for joining us.